The evening had already settled into a quiet rhythm when the knock came, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the soft hum of Emily Carter's small townhouse in Portland, the rain outside blurring the streetlights into pale reflections as she stood alone in her kitchen, sleeves rolled up, mind drifting between tired thoughts of work, old dreams, and the gentle loneliness she had learned to live with since college ended, a loneliness that never fully left but had grown familiar enough to ignore. Until that knock arrived again, firmer this time, carrying a strange weight that made her pause, her heart speeding up for reasons she could not name, because no one ever came this late and no one was expected, and yet something deep inside her seemed to recognize the moment before her mind did, so she dried her hands, walked slowly to the door, and opened it to find Daniel Brooks standing there, rain clinging to his jacket, his hair darker from the weather, his posture careful as if he might step back at any second. And in that instant the years between them collapsed, pulling her back to crowded classrooms, shared notebooks, late nights in the library, laughter that felt easy, and words that were never said, because Daniel was not just a former classmate but the quiet ache she had carried out of college, the one she told herself was only a memory, only timing, only youth, yet here he was, breathing, real, looking at her with eyes filled with hesitation and something deeper. Something unsettled. As he spoke her name like it still mattered, apologizing for coming unannounced, saying he did not know where else to go, and Emily felt the world tilt slightly as she stepped aside to let him in, not trusting her voice, noticing how the house seemed to hold its breath as the door closed behind him, the rain now a distant sound, the warmth inside mixing with the cold he carried, and as they stood there for a brief moment, unsure where to look, she realized that this was not a casual visit or a friendly surprise but the start of something unfinished, because Daniel's presence carried urgency, not excitement, and when he finally spoke again, explaining that he had just moved back for work and had seen her name on a mailbox down the street days ago, debating whether to knock until he could no longer ignore the pull, Emily felt a quiet tension rise, the kind that comes before a truth is revealed, and she led him into the living room, offering tea with automatic politeness, noticing the way his hand shook just slightly as he accepted it, the way his gaze lingered on familiar objects as if trying to anchor himself, and as they sat across from each other, the air thick with everything unsaid, Emily sensed that this night would not be simple or brief, because Daniel was not here to catch up or relive old times, he was here because something inside him had reached a breaking point, and as he opened his mouth to speak again, his voice low and serious, Emily felt a quiet fear mixed with anticipation, knowing that whatever he needed to say would change how she remembered the past and how she stepped into the future, and in that moment, with rain pressing against the windows and silence filling the space between their words, the door he knocked on was no longer just her front door, but the one she had closed years ago, believing it was safer that way. Emily led Daniel into the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the furniture, making the space feel both intimate and heavy with unspoken thoughts, as they settled into the worn couch and armchair opposite each other, the rain drumming softly against the windows outside, and for a moment neither spoke, letting the quiet stretch, feeling the years between them like a tangible presence, until Daniel, with a hesitant sigh, finally broke the silence, admitting that he had only recently moved back to Portland for work and had not expected to see anyone from college, yet seeing her again stirred emotions he could no longer ignore, and Emily, listening, felt the memories flood back, late-night study sessions, laughter echoing in empty halls, shared coffee in the small cafe near campus, and the subtle glances that once hinted at feelings neither dared name, all of it resurfacing with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, making her wonder why he had really come, why now, why after so many years, and when she asked him softly what brought him to her door, Daniel's eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with vulnerability as he confessed that seeing her by chance at a bookstore had shaken him more than he expected, reminding him of everything he had left unfinished and all the words he never said, and Emily, feeling a mixture of warmth and apprehension, noticed the way he fiddled with his cup, tracing the rim with his fingers as if grounding himself, the quiet sincerity in his voice making her realize that this was more than a casual visit, more than a fleeting moment of nostalgia. It was a confrontation with the past, with feelings that had never truly faded, as he admitted that leaving college had been his way of escaping the fear of admitting how much she mattered to him, that he had tried to move on but nothing had filled the space she left, and Emily, holding her breath, felt the fragile tension between longing and caution, remembering how she had convinced herself that time had healed old wounds, yet the sight of him now, standing, or rather sitting, before her, unguarded and earnest, made her question all of that. And when Daniel's voice faltered slightly, acknowledging that he could no longer pretend those feelings didn't exist, she felt a strange mixture of anger, relief, and hope, all blending together in a moment that seemed suspended in time, where the past and present collided, making the room feel smaller, warmer, and heavier with meaning. And though Emily wanted to speak, to ask questions, to find closure or clarity, she remained silent, letting him speak, letting him unravel the story he carried with him for years. Feeling the rain outside as a gentle accompaniment to the storm of emotions inside, knowing that what they shared in this room now was both delicate and important, and as Daniel's words continued to spill softly, recounting regret, missed opportunities, and unspoken affection, Emily realized that this night would not end quietly, that it held the potential to change everything between them, to reopen doors she thought had long been closed. And as the clock ticked and the rain softened into a lull, the two of them sat there, suspended in a fragile, unspoken understanding, where past memories and present feelings intertwined, and the simple act of sharing a cup of tea became a bridge over years of distance, a bridge that neither of them could yet see the end of, but both knew they wanted to cross together, even if only for a few moments. Before the truth fully revealed itself, Daniel looked up from his cup, meeting Emily's eyes with a seriousness that made her stomach tighten, and in that moment, the room felt charged with everything that had been left unsaid for years, the quiet rain outside fading into the background as he began to speak, telling her that when they had graduated, he had been afraid, not of her, but of how deeply he cared, of the emotions he hadn't yet understood or had been too scared to admit, that leaving had seemed easier than facing the truth. And Emily felt her chest tighten as he admitted that he had thought she didn't feel the same, that he had convinced himself that distance and time would erase what they shared, but it never did. And now, standing, or rather sitting, before her after all this time, he needed her to know the truth he had buried, the regret that had shadowed him, the longing that had never faded. And as he spoke, Emily remembered all the small moments she had cherished, the late-night library sessions, shared laughter in the cafeteria, the quiet glances across crowded lecture halls, and she realized that she had carried feelings too, feelings she had disguised as friendship, feelings she had thought were lost with graduation. And hearing Daniel confess his own vulnerability made her heart ache with a mixture of pain and hope, a strange warmth spreading through her chest as he continued, apologizing for unknowingly hurting her, acknowledging the impact of his absence. And Emily's voice caught when she whispered that he had broken her heart without realizing it, the words hanging between them like fragile glass, yet somehow safe, because they were shared now. And Daniel nodded, eyes glistening with quiet emotion, assuring her that he did not expect forgiveness or anything in return, only that she knew he had carried the truth with him for years, that he had loved her silently and had finally found the courage to say it. And Emily, overwhelmed by the raw honesty, stood near the window, staring at her reflection as if seeing herself through his eyes, realizing that time had changed them both. But some feelings remained untamed, that love and longing could linger even through separation, that the heart often remembers what the mind tries to forget. And when she turned back to him, her eyes searching his, she asked simply, why now, why after all these years? And Daniel's reply was steady, almost fragile, admitting that some feelings do not fade, that they wait quietly until someone is brave enough to confront them. And as he spoke, Emily felt a flutter of hope mixed with fear, a longing she had thought was buried returning with force, making her aware of the fragile possibility that their story might not be over, that despite the years and distance, something real still existed between them. And as the rain continued to patter softly on the roof, the air between them grew heavier with meaning, charged with the tension of confessions, regrets, and unspoken dreams, a tension that was painful yet sweet, reminding Emily that some truths are too important to leave unspoken, that love once felt can never be fully erased. And as Daniel's words settled into her heart, she realized that this conversation, this confession, was a turning point, a moment suspended in time where the past and present collided, leaving her breathless, uncertain, yet unwilling to turn away, knowing that the next step, whatever it might be, would define not just this night, but the possibility of everything they had left to share. And in that quiet, rain-soaked room, two hearts, once distant and cautious, found themselves leaning toward the truth, toward each other, toward the fragile, hopeful chance that some stories are never really over, they just wait for the courage to speak. Emily returned to her seat, the warmth from the lamp casting a soft glow over the room, and for a moment, the silence between them was heavier than any words could be, charged with the weight of confessions and unspoken feelings, as Daniel, standing or sitting, did not try to push, did not demand anything, only let the truth linger in the space they shared, explaining gently that he did not want to disrupt her life or undo the peace she had built in the years since college, that he came simply to be honest, to let her know what he had carried silently, and Emily, listening, felt a mixture of relief, curiosity, and caution, recognizing the careful courage it took for him to speak, realizing that despite the years apart, the bond they shared had not been erased but had instead waited quietly, resilient, for this very moment, and she studied him, noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor. The maturity that tempered the old nervous energy, the sincerity that had always been present but now shone more clearly, and she found herself reflecting on her own journey, the growth, the lessons, the quiet acceptance of solitude, and yet the warmth of his presence stirred something familiar, a gentle longing that had never fully disappeared, and when she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady, she thanked him for knocking, acknowledging the bravery it took to return after all this time. And Daniel nodded, understanding that this was not a promise, not an expectation, but a beginning of honesty, and when he moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle, he offered a simple invitation, that if she ever wanted to talk again, he would be there, willing to listen, ready to share without pressure or demands, and Emily, feeling the flutter of old emotions mingled with new possibilities, chose not to answer immediately, instead allowing the moment to breathe, to exist without forcing closure, and she noticed that for the first time in years, the door she had once closed on the past remained slightly open, both literally and symbolically. The rain outside now softened to a gentle patter, reflecting the calm yet charged atmosphere within, and as Daniel stepped out, leaving her to her thoughts, Emily realized that the night had shifted something inside her, that honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront feelings long buried could change the way she saw herself, him, and their shared history, that love and longing are not always loud or dramatic but can exist in quiet, fragile moments like this, moments that leave the heart open, aware, and hopeful, and as she closed the door slowly behind him, Emily felt a strange mixture of closure and anticipation, understanding that some stories do not end with a single conversation, that some connections survive time and distance, waiting for the right moment to be recognized again, and in that realization, she allowed herself a small, tentative smile, knowing that the past had returned not to haunt her, but to remind her of what was possible, that the night, the rain, and the quiet courage of a knock on her door had opened a door within her heart she thought she had closed, leaving her with the gentle, hopeful awareness that while endings may come, beginnings often arrive unexpectedly, and sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to knock and speak the truth.